The moment Greg turned to me, tapped his pen against the conference table and sneered. "Why don't you leave the thinking to people who can spell, Emily?" Felt like a punch in the stomach. The boardroom went silent, the tension crackling like static in the air. My cheeks burned, my mind reeled, and every cell in my body seemed to scream for me to walk out. This wasn't the first time he'd belittled me. I'd gotten used to his sarcastic little digs about my reading speed or my muddled memos, but never had he launched such a blatant attack in front of everyone. I saw the startled expressions around the table, and I felt a hope that someone would speak up. But their eyes darted away, and my stomach dropped. The humiliation was swift and public, and I choked on the surge of emotion rising in my throat. I forced a laugh, trying to hide the sting. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one came to my defense. My heart pounded as I realized this was the moment everything would change. This was the day I decided I'd had enough. I was done. The day I stopped letting him tear me down. I remember feeling as though my veins had turned to ice, yet my skin burned with shame. On the surface, I managed to crack a dismissive grin, hoping to appear unbothered. But inside, I was trembling with a mixture of anger, hurt, and a crushing realization. This man would never respect me. For years, I'd tolerated his jibes, telling myself it wasn't worth creating a scene over. I'd adapted to a world that often equated dyslexia with incompetence, training myself to keep my head down and do whatever I could to avoid drawing attention. Yet, this time, his words felt like a final blow, a line drawn in the sand. Something about the way he spat my name made me recognize that I had been complicit in my own belittlement by never standing up for myself. My thoughts swirled, my heart pounded, and I struggled to steady my breathing. Even as I left the conference room, I maintained my forced smile, nodding politely at coworkers who averted their gaze. It was as if they sensed the humiliation radiating off me, but none dared to question it. I told myself, quietly, that I could handle it, but deep down, I knew different. That night, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, remembering a younger version of me who felt flawed from the start. When I was 8, reading out loud in class was my personal nightmare. I would stumble over words, skip letters, and mix up meanings, drawing snickers from classmates and exasperated sighs from teachers. I still recall the sting of their dismissive glances and the humiliation of being told I was just not trying hard enough. On the playground, I was often the last one picked for group activities. At lunch, I'd quietly sit alone, pushing food around my plate, pretending it was my choice to be isolated. The bullies found easy prey in a girl who struggled with spelling her own name some days, calling me stupid or lazy. Each insult burrowed deep, carving out a hollow place inside where self-doubt thrived. My mother tried to reassure me, whispering I was bright and creative, but the echoes of laughter at school drowned out her words. Over time, I learned to shrink into the background, to stay out of the spotlight. Even so, there was a spark of determination in me that refused to go out. Adulthood crept up on me with both promise and pressure. I realized the professional world valued efficiency and precision, areas that could be challenging for someone with dyslexia. So I became an expert at concealing my vulnerabilities. I learned to rely on text-to-speech software, grammar checkers, and meticulously designed templates. I'd spend twice as long preparing reports, double-checking every letter, terrified of making a fool of myself. It was exhausting, but I found little loopholes that helped me navigate. In time, I became adept at streamlining my responsibilities to highlight my strengths: creativity, problem-solving, empathy. Managers liked my knack for out-of-the-box thinking, though they rarely saw the sweat and anxiety behind my polished presentations. I wanted to stand out, but never for the wrong reasons. My quiet success came at a personal cost. Constant worry about being exposed. I feared what would happen if others discovered how often I second-guessed my reading comprehension or triple-checked the simplest memos. Looking back, I see how I tucked my dyslexia into a secret drawer, opening it only in private moments of frustration and doubt. Though I managed to build a respectable career, I still carried the deep, haunting, persistent shame of feeling inherently flawed. I first crossed paths with Greg when I joined the company after graduate school. Initially, he seemed charming, always quick with a joke or a friendly smile. But behind that veneer lurked a hidden edge. He'd make offhand remarks in team meetings, questioning my figures or insinuating I hadn't done my due diligence. At first, I chalked it up to him testing a new hire, ensuring I was competent. Yet as months passed, I noticed he rarely treated my colleagues the same way. He singled me out with subtle, condescending jabs, complimenting me on the pretty colors in my presentations rather than their content, or helpfully reminding me to use spell check before I sent emails. Sometimes he'd casually ask if my condition allowed me to handle complex tasks, always wearing that smarmy grin. Behind closed doors, he'd assign me low-level administrative duties, ignoring my actual job title and skill set. I'd watch new hires bypass me in responsibilities and promotions, all the while Greg claimed he was doing me a favor by not overloading me. I felt a knot in my gut every time he spoke my name, an unease that only grew as his jabs became more frequent and pointed. Long before my idea took shape, I sensed there was a void in the productivity market for people like me, those who processed information differently. I'd tried countless platforms and apps, but each one felt cumbersome, packed with dense text and endless instructions. My dyslexic mind wanted something more intuitive, an interface guided by visual cues, color-coded tasks, and a layout that felt like a living collage rather than a spreadsheet. On restless nights, I'd sketch out designs in a worn notebook, imagining a system that would gently steer users through projects without overwhelming them. I called it Threadlight, born from the notion that our thoughts and ideas connect like threads of light, weaving something luminous when properly harnessed. It was more than a passing whim. It felt like a calling. I believed it could change how teams communicated, shift how managers assigned work, and empower people with different cognitive styles to excel rather than merely adapt. Over months, this concept pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. I made notes on color theory, user flows, and gamification elements, my imagination on overdrive. Threadlight was my secret project, my personal rebellion against a world that refused to see my dyslexia as a strength. I'd spent weeks rehearsing how I'd bring Threadlight to life at the company, dreaming of the day I'd show Greg and everyone else what real innovation looked like. When I finally worked up the nerve to present my idea, I scheduled a small meeting to gauge interest. Greg arrived late, acknowledged me, then slouched in his chair, arms folded. My slides flickered across the screen as I explained the platform's core principles. Minimal text reliance, vibrant visual organization, and a fluid approach to task management. For a few shining moments, I felt a spark of confidence. Then Greg interrupted, loudly, "This is your big plan? Looks like a child's art project." A flicker of laughter rose from someone in the back and my stomach knotted. I tried to salvage the pitch, but he cut me off again, and then came that line, uttered with an air of finality, "Why don't you leave the thinking to people who can spell, Emily?" The words struck like a slap, my confidence faltering. I stood there, mouth dry, cheeks aflame, as he punctuated my presentation with condescension. That was the precise moment I knew I was done. The dream I'd built wouldn't survive under his watch. After that meeting, I reached a place of absolute clarity. There was no official resignation speech, no dramatic showdown. Instead, I typed out a brief email, thanking the company for the opportunity, citing personal reasons for my departure, and pressed send. I remember the strange sense of calm that settled over me the moment I left the building for the last time. Without Greg looming over my shoulder, a weight I'd carried for years lifted. In the quiet that followed, I felt the enormity of freedom and fear. Rent was due, bills piled up, and I had no steady paycheck. But I also had Threadlight, a vision that refused to let me go. So I started freelancing, taking on small design projects to pay the basics. Every spare hour, late into the night, I worked on bringing Threadlight to life. My apartment became a laboratory of sketches, sticky notes, and user flow diagrams taped to the walls. Code lines scrolled on my laptop until my eyes blurred. Exhaustion wrestled with excitement and determination, but every time I felt doubt, I remembered Greg's sneer. Quiet quitting was my final act at that company, but it was also the first step toward something greater. At first, Threadlight's progress was slow, a whisper in a crowded world of productivity tools. I posted modest updates on my social media profiles, hoping a handful of friends might find it useful. But then, something magical happened. Word of mouth. A small circle of users, mostly other freelancers and entrepreneurs, discovered the platform and began singing its praises. Within a few months, Threadlight's user base hit 5,000. Every time I refreshed the stats page, my heart fluttered. Then came the revenue. A modest subscription fee that, to my astonishment, totaled $120,000 within 6 months. That income felt surreal. Proof that I wasn't simply chasing a dream, but building something people genuinely needed. Encouraged by this momentum, I reached out to a mid-sized marketing agency, pitching Threadlight as a solution for their workflow chaos. After an initial trial, they signed on for a company-wide rollout, becoming the first major client to invest in my vision. I nearly cried when I received the purchase order, praised its clarity and accessibility. Instead of laughter or disdain, Threadlight was met with appreciation and excitement. Each new testimonial was a validation that my dyslexia-fueled perspective was not a weakness, but a vital strength. I finally began believing it myself. With each new day, Threadlight's momentum gathered speed like a surging tide. I poured my heart into refining the platform, incorporating user feedback, and constantly iterating on features. Sometimes I'd pull all-nighters, not out of desperation, but fueled by exhilaration, thrilled that people genuinely loved what I'd built. A small but passionate community formed around Threadlight, sharing tips on how to maximize its visual cues and celebrating the freedom it offered from text-heavy environments. While money began trickling in, the real currency for me was the gratitude I received from users. Messages poured in from individuals who'd felt excluded in traditional workspaces, praising Threadlight for its intuitive design. I started hiring a handful of freelancers, each with their own unique strengths, to help develop new modules and ensure our infrastructure could handle the growing user base. Even on the tough days, when servers crashed or deadlines loomed, I could feel the same unwavering conviction that had guided me away from Greg's toxicity. It was as though every instance of self-doubt I'd carried since childhood was slowly being eclipsed by the belief that I had a valid place in the world. Threadlight was more than an app. It was my testament to hope. Not long after, a modest technology blog picked up on Threadlight's unique approach. Their article, titled "A Visual Revolution for the Modern Workforce," focused on how my dyslexia-informed design choices set the platform apart. I felt a mixture of excitement and vulnerability. My personal story was now part of the narrative. But the response was overwhelmingly positive, flooding my inbox with interviews and partnership inquiries. Soon, a bigger publication caught wind of Threadlight, leading to a short segment on a popular morning news show. I watched from my couch, stunned, as the host demonstrated the app's color-coded interface for millions of viewers. That day, the number of sign-ups exploded, and my phone buzzed with congratulatory messages. Yet, amid the chaos, I felt a quiet sense of validation. For so long, I'd believed my dyslexia disqualified me from success, but here it was serving as a powerful differentiator. Of course, there were critics who dismissed it as a trend or novelty. Still, every doubt reinforced my determination to keep moving forward. Each new milestone reminded me that self-belief could stand taller than any insult or dismissal I'd ever faced. The world was noticing, and I felt unstoppable, with bright new horizons ahead. Amid this swell of recognition, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me here. Every snide remark and belittling comment that once made me doubt my worth. It felt surreal to realize that the very thing others had mocked, my struggle with dyslexia, had become the driving force behind a platform now reaching thousands of users. Still, my workload was immense, and there were nights I'd stare at endless lines of code, my eyes blurring, old insecurities whispering that I wasn't smart enough for this. Yet each time, I'd remember the voices of Threadlight's growing community. People shared stories of how the app had improved their productivity, given them hope, or reignited their creativity. I saw pieces of my own struggles in their messages, and that kept me going. Whenever frustration threatened to overshadow progress, I'd take a deep breath, reminding myself that Threadlight was bigger than any single hurdle. Team members, mentors, and even strangers stepped up to offer guidance, ensuring I never felt completely alone. Every day, I woke with a renewed determination to refine our features, bring in more accessibility tools, and prove that inclusive design was not just a niche, it was the future of work. Truly unstoppable. When the email from Time magazine landed in my inbox, I could hardly believe my eyes. At first, I assumed it might be a generic press inquiry. But the editor's message was clear. They wanted to feature Threadlight and me in an upcoming issue dedicated to groundbreaking innovations in the tech industry. My heart pounded as I reread the words, worried I'd somehow misunderstood. Yet the call with their editorial team confirmed it. They found my dyslexia-driven design philosophy compelling enough to merit a major spotlight. The interview process was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. I spent hours on Zoom calls with their reporters, discussing everything from my childhood struggles to the moment I walked out on Greg. They seemed fascinated by how adversity had shaped my determination and creativity. In the back of my mind, I still heard that nagging voice telling me I wasn't good enough. But with every question, I felt a surge of pride. Time wanted to celebrate Threadlight not just for its success, but for its very genesis, my refusal to be limited by dyslexia. By the end of the interviews, they teased a special surprise. Little did I know that surprise would change my life forever, beyond measure. A month later, a package arrived at my doorstep, bearing the unmistakable red border of Time magazine. With trembling hands, I tore it open. There on the front cover was my face, accompanied by the bold headline, "The Dyslexic Brain, Behind the App That's Changing How Teams Work." A surge of emotion flooded me. I stared, disbelieving at the photograph they'd taken weeks prior. They'd captured me seated at my desk, Threadlight's colorful interface glowing on the screen. It was surreal to imagine newsstands across the country displaying this image, my name printed in glossy letters. Once my disbelief subsided, sheer awe washed over me. Tears slipped down my cheeks, carrying years of self-doubt and hidden shame away with them. For all the times I'd felt invisible or ridiculed, this moment was proof that strength could be born from struggle. In that instant, I remembered every teacher who told me I wasn't trying hard enough, every classmate's cruel joke, and Greg's sneering words. All of it had led me here, to a cover story that not only hailed Threadlight, but affirmed my worth. My dyslexia, once a secret burden, now shone like a badge of honor. I'd finally come full circle. The morning the cover officially hit stands, my phone buzzed with countless notifications, texts from old friends, ex-colleagues, and even distant acquaintances who suddenly remembered me. Social media was ablaze with congratulations, and I found myself smiling through happy tears as I scrolled. Then, late that evening, a LinkedIn notification pinged. I clicked on it to see a familiar name, Greg. My stomach lurched. He'd sent a carefully worded message, congratulating me on my impressive accomplishment and insisting he'd always believed in my potential. I stared at the screen, recalling every moment of his mockery. A part of me wanted to fire back, to remind him of his hurtful words, to lay bare the damage he'd caused. But as I reread his hollow praise, I felt nothing but a strange calm. I realized I no longer needed his validation or an apology to heal. Without a second thought, I deleted the message, resisting the urge to block him outright. There was no satisfaction in revenge, only in moving forward with dignity. That simple act felt like completely reclaiming my story, proving to myself that I was more than his petty insults. Greg's chapter in my life was well and truly over. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of events and interviews, navigating a sudden surge of attention that felt both exhilarating and daunting. I spoke on panels about inclusive technology, sat for more magazine spreads, and even recorded a podcast segment about Threadlight's origin story. Through it all, I was struck by how genuinely curious people were about the role dyslexia played in shaping my vision. Every now and then, I'd glance around, half expecting someone to laugh at my reading errors or roll their eyes at my spelling. Instead, they applauded my transparency, admitting it gave them hope for their own challenges. Even so, I occasionally questioned whether I deserved all this praise. Could I continue living up to these lofty expectations? Late at night, I'd lie awake, consumed by a mix of gratitude and anxiety. But then, I'd open Threadlight, scroll through user feedback, and see the tangible impact it was making on real people. That was all the reassurance I needed. My dyslexia, once a hidden pain, had blossomed into a creative asset. Perhaps that realization was the very greatest gift of all. Understanding that what once held me back now propelled me forward. Within a few weeks of the time cover, Threadlight received a flood of partnership proposals from organizations looking to integrate visual-first solutions into their workflows. The momentum felt surreal. I was invited to speak at conferences on design, technology, and neurodiversity. Before stepping on stage at my first keynote, my nerves nearly got the better of me. My old insecurities flared up. What if I stumbled over words in front of this crowd? But I took a deep breath, reminded myself that my weaknesses had led me here, and confidently began my speech. To my amazement, the audience listened in rapt attention. Afterward, dozens of people approached to share their stories of hidden disabilities, silent struggles, or unrecognized differences. Their gratitude was overwhelming, and I felt the invisible thread connecting us all. Each handshake, each teary-eyed thank you, felt like a piece of my own healing. Word by word, I shed the shame that had shadowed me for so long. Threadlight's user base skyrocketed once again, as companies realized that inclusive design benefited everyone, not just those with dyslexia. I found myself busier than ever, juggling expansions and interviews. Yet amidst the frenzy, I held on to the pride of stepping into my worth. Despite the buzz around Threadlight, I knew there was still a very long way to go. Many companies hesitated to embrace a tool that defied traditional text-heavy norms, and skepticism ran deep in certain circles. Rather than feeling intimidated, I saw it as an opportunity to refine my approach. I organized workshops where potential clients could experience Threadlight's power firsthand, designing activities that highlighted how visual mapping reduced stress and streamlined communication. Watching skeptics turn into supporters after a single session was even more electrifying. Each demonstration felt like proving to the world and myself that dyslexia was more than a label. My team expanded, and I hired individuals with diverse skill sets. Software engineers who understood accessibility, graphic designers who spoke the language of color, and consultants specializing in neurodiversity research. We learned from each other daily, forging a collaborative energy that pulsed with creativity. Slowly, the larger business world began to pay attention. Innovation awards trickled in, and venture capitalists requested meetings. But I remained cautious, determined not to lose the spirit that birthed Threadlight in the first place. Impact, not just profit, genuinely guided me. I felt a newfound confidence. I was building a movement, not a mere product. Around this time, I was invited back to my alma mater for a seminar on entrepreneurship. Standing before a new generation of students, I recalled the many afternoons I'd spent in those lecture halls, struggling to keep pace with notes flashing too quickly on the projector screen. As I shared my journey, from the quiet girl who dreaded being called on to read aloud, to the founder of Threadlight, I watched something spark in their eyes. One student who'd been diagnosed with ADHD asked me how I found the courage to believe in myself. I told her the truth. Courage often arrived only after I'd taken the first shaky step. After the session, she confided she felt less alone, vowing to channel her differences into her passion for design. Her words moved me deeply, reminding me that each story of resilience lit a path for others. Returning to the campus hallways, I felt a wave of nostalgia mixed with triumph. Though the corridors were the same, I had changed beyond measure. I smiled at the thought that somewhere, the little girl who felt broken by dyslexia was witnessing this moment, finally standing tall in the place that once subdued her. As Threadlight's reach broadened, so did our responsibility. I launched a scholarship program for students with learning differences, funding software and specialized tutoring that many families couldn't afford. The first time I read through the scholarship applications, I felt my heart break and heal in the same breath. There were teenagers grappling with shame, just as I once had, and adults who'd never been diagnosed but always felt off. Their stories reignited my resolve to keep innovating. We expanded Threadlight's interface to include audio prompts, advanced color coding, and gesture-based navigation, broadening its usability for people with visual impairments or motor challenges. Every development cycle carried the weight of these personal narratives. Meanwhile, the team grew into a deeply vibrant tapestry of voices, each bringing a unique perspective to the table. We held weekly brainstorming sessions over video chats, using Threadlight itself to visually map our ideas. Occasionally, I'd step back and marvel at how far we'd come, from a single sketch in my notebook to a bustling platform making real-world impact. Each update, each success, felt like a direct rebuke to those who saw dyslexia as a hindrance. This was our testament, an ever-evolving promise to champion the people often overlooked. Over the next year, Threadlight's user community exploded in size, with startups, nonprofits, and global corporations adopting our visual-first platform. Our servers strained under the influx of new accounts, and I found myself coordinating with tech support at odd hours, ensuring the system stayed stable. It was a thrilling kind of chaos, fueled by the knowledge that we were making a genuine and measurable difference. Eventually, the time came for me to address the entire Threadlight team in person. We gathered for a company retreat, a vivid mosaic of designers, engineers, marketers, and support staff, many of whom had never met face-to-face. Standing before them, I thought of all the solitary nights I'd spent sketching Threadlight's earliest prototypes. Now here I was, surrounded by passionate individuals who believed in the same dream. I thanked them for their dedication and shared my bright vision for the future: expansion into education, deeper accessibility features, and a global push to redefine workplace collaboration. The applause that followed sounded like a collective heartbeat. In that moment, I felt how far I'd traveled from that day in Greg's boardroom, when I believed I had no voice. Here, my voice resonated, echoing with hope and shared purpose. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from a teacher named Mrs. Gallagher. She'd been using Threadlight in her classroom for students who struggled with reading and writing. Her words were deeply heartfelt and wonderfully detailed. She thanked me for creating a platform that brought excitement and engagement back into learning. The students, who once truly dreaded essays and group projects, now collaborated through intuitive visuals, building confidence with each completed assignment. Tears welled in my eyes as I reread her note, recalling my own childhood experiences. I imagined how different life might have been if I'd had a teacher who recognized dyslexia as a different way of thinking, not a shortfall. Determined to pay it forward, I arranged a donation of Threadlight licenses to her entire school district, along with specialized training sessions for the faculty. The impact was immediate, as more classrooms embraced the new method. Photos poured in, kids smiling, pointing at color-coded timelines, proudly discussing ideas that once felt impossible to express. In those images, I saw the potential to break the cycle of shame that often plagues neurodivergent learners. Threadlight wasn't just about boosting productivity anymore. It was about unveiling hidden strengths and sparking lifelong curiosity. Even as Threadlight thrived, life wasn't without hurdles. A major system outage struck on a Monday morning, bringing our platform to a crawl and threatening to unravel the trust we'd built. Panic buzzed through our chat channels, but we mobilized quickly, pulling in engineers from every corner of the company. For 36 hours straight, we worked around the clock. I personally called clients to explain the situation, offering transparency and gratitude for their patience. The crisis reminded me of the fragility of success, how easily one disaster could overshadow months of progress. But as the system came back online, I realized another truth. Our community was invested in more than just the product. They believed in our mission. Messages poured in, offering encouragement and solidarity, reinforcing the idea that we were not alone in this journey. When at last the chaos subsided, I felt an odd sense of deep peace. Struggle, it seemed, was woven into the DNA of Threadlight, much like my own dyslexia had been woven into me. Each setback was an invitation to grow, adapt, and prove our resilience. Instead of fearing the next crisis, I welcomed it, certain that our collective spirit would rise to the challenge. The day Threadlight reached 1 million active users felt like a dream. We commemorated the milestone with a virtual celebration, staff and users logging in from around the globe. People wore hats, holding mugs in celebration. Confetti animations burst on screens, and I watched in awe as hundreds of tiny video windows showed faces beaming with pride. During my speech, I recounted the story of that fateful meeting with Greg, the humiliation, the final straw, and the quiet resolve that followed. A hush fell across the digital room. Then someone unmuted and said, "Thank you for not giving up." Another chimed in, sharing how they'd felt sidelined at work until Threadlight gave them a new way to communicate. Their words carried the echo of my own struggles. With tears in my eyes, I expressed my gratitude for their trust, for believing in a vision born from dyslexia, and for reminding me that empathy was the force that truly bound us together. In that collective moment of mutual respect, I felt a sense of belonging deeper than any recognition or award could provide. Threadlight wasn't merely a platform. It had become a testament to what happens when human connection meets unyielding determination. When I look back now, I no longer see my dyslexia as a flaw, but as the spark that ignited everything. If I'd never struggled with those jumbled letters in elementary school, I might not have sought out the unique ways people think and learn. Threadlight was born of that need, an affirmation that different minds could forge brilliant paths if given a welcoming space. Greg's sneer may have been the catalyst that pushed me to leave, but the real superpower was within me all along. And it's within everyone who's ever felt marginalized, misunderstood, or forced to hide who they truly are. We don't need to conform to outdated standards. We can build new spaces designed for our varied, vibrant minds. That's the heartbeat of Threadlight, and it's what I tell every person who feels less than. Dyslexia isn't a curse. It's a gateway to seeing the world in ways others miss. As I wrap my hands around this truth, I invite every quiet, fearful, or underestimated soul to step forward and take up space. Stop hiding. Innovate. Imagine. Our biggest obstacles might just become our brightest superpowers, lighting the way for countless others.